Hi, I'm Richard Vague with Tychos. Today we want to take a look at the economies of the combatants in our two most prominent wars of the moment, Gaza and Ukraine. You may object, thinking that wars are about far more than economics. That may be true, but we would suggest they cannot be divorced from economics, and a useful starting point for thinking about any war is its economic dimension. As an example of its relevance, we recall a time early in our recent Afghanistan war when the U.S. military had spent $120 billion in a given year, or $330 million a day, on a war at a time that country's GDP averaged a mere $13 billion. That was a financial fact so out of whack that it had to mean something in our approach to that war was terribly askew. One wag suggested that we could have put everyone in Afghanistan on the payroll and saved $100 billion a year. So let's look at the economy in Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. These charts are all in real, in other words, inflation-adjusted international dollars. So there's the exchange rate factor or effect in what we're looking at as well. And that makes it easy to compare and to account for the extraordinary ravages of inflation in countries like Turkey and Lebanon. The first thing to notice is that Palestine's economy at $17 billion is at a subsistence level, one of the poorest, if not the poorest, in the world, and has been for some time. Put simply, they seemingly have nothing to lose and have been in that state for decades. The second thing to notice is the collapse in Lebanon's economy from 2019 forward, and it stood at $71 billion in 2022. They've had one of the worst economic collapses in recent history. In fact, their poverty rate over the past decade has tripled, going from 12% in 2012 to 44% in 2022. In some respects, Lebanon too can be thought of as a country with little to lose. In stark contrast, Israel is one of the great generators of intellectual capital in the world as measured by such things as patents, and it keeps marching ahead, and its GDP now stands at $525 billion, though this war may at some point take a toll. But let's zoom out just a bit and take stock of the three other major players in the region: Iran, obviously, but also Saudi Arabia and Turkey. The sanctions of Iran and the inflation in Turkey, combined with the collapse in their currencies against the euro and the dollar, have all been body blows to those economies. Only Saudi Arabia has held steady, testimony to the ever-powerful contribution of its oil production in a country with a relatively modest population. But let's count up the countries in the region that are under some form of duress. That includes, at the very least, Iran, Turkey, Lebanon, and Palestine. Stress is not a good thing for regional stability. On the other hand, if you are an optimist, the extreme duress that some of these countries are experiencing may make them more receptive to a resolution through negotiations, though it sure doesn't seem that way at the moment. Now let's take a quick look at Russia versus Ukraine. As you might expect, Russia is far larger, at more than 10 times the size of Ukraine, but it is always far more expensive to be an invader than it is to be a defender, so this war is not as mismatched as it might seem. Both countries are economically challenged, and both were already suffering shrinking populations and industrial challenges well before this war. With war, that's obviously now far worse, and even if by magic this war were resolved tomorrow, these are countries that will have a hard time recovering to any semblance of a favorable economy. Looking at this chart, it's easy instead to predict an ongoing, long-lasting war to nowhere. That's it for this week. As always, keep the conversation going in the comments. Thanks.